Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series on the essays on the Gita with our beloved Ranga. We are on page 15, is it? Beginning with a sentence, when we understand the conception of avatarhood. So,
we'll read the para first and then we come back to it. When we thus understand the conception of avatarhood, we see that whether for the fundamental teaching of the Gita, our present subject, or for spiritual life generally, the external aspect has only a secondary importance. Such controversies as the one that has raged in Europe over the historicity of Christ would seem to a spiritually minded Indian largely a waste of time. He would concede to it a considerable historical but hardly any religious importance. For what does it matter in the end whether a Jesus, son of the carpenter Joseph, was actually born in Nazareth or Bethlehem, lived and taught and was done to death on a real or trumped up charge of sedition? So long as we can know by spiritual experience the inner Christ, live uplifted in the light of his teaching, and escape from the yoke of the natural law by that atonement of man with God, of which the crucifixion is a symbol. If the Christ, God made man, lives within our spiritual being, it would seem to matter little whether or not a son of Mary physically lived and suffered and died in Judea. So too, the Krishna who matters to us is the eternal incarnation of the divine and not the historical teacher and leader of men.
it is so beautifully written, isn't it?
Wonderful.
Oh.
So, the avatarhood. A brief description of what the avatar is. Srimanta makes a distinction between the ordinary man, the vibhuti, and the avatar. And last time we had an interesting discussion about women vibhutis.
Yes, yes.
And we had many examples, and some of them seemed very right, like Joan of Arc. She had a
Yes.
specific work to do.
Yes.
Srimanta himself mentions Napoleon.
Mm-hmm.
So
And we mentioned Lincoln and Washington.
Yes, Lincoln, he had a very specific work to do, and he was a great character. And Washington even, yes, because he had the work of establishing the world's biggest democracy and the most populous and the richest country in the world, independent of Britain. Yeah, it was definitely that. Who is the avatar? The avatar is a human being who has opened to the divine in such a way that he becomes conscious of the divinity within him. A yogi is not an avatar. A yogi is definitely superior to a normal man, but the avatar is conscious of the divinity in him and he behaves like the divine. That's why Srimanta is saying in the footnote here, Chaitanya, the avatar of Nadia, is said to have been partly or occasionally occupied by the divine consciousness and power. He used to behave sometimes like a devotee, in which case he is not divine. And sometimes he used to behave like the divine. He would bless people, grant their boons, and things like that. So that's a part avatar, partly avatar. In Ramakrishna's case, he himself declared himself to be an avatar. In a very guarded way. He didn't declare. There is no ego in him, so it's not an egoistic claim. But in Sriramda's case, there are enough statements which show that he is an avatar. There is a very interesting, a very funny episode in the ashram about that. I might as well mention it here, if you remember that. So there was an argument between two ashramites, one saying that Srimanta is an avatar, And the other saying, no, Sri Aurobindo is not an avatar. He is a great yogi, no doubt, but he is not an avatar. So it was reported to Sri Aurobindo, this incident, that the one who was claiming avatarhood for Sri Aurobindo got very angry and beat up that other fellow. Okay? So when this was reported to Sri Aurobindo's sense of humor came to the front. He says, after the beating, did he accept me as an avatar? So that's the story. When we thus understand the conception of avatarhood, we see that whether for the fundamental teaching of the Gita, our present subject, or for spiritual life generally, the external aspect has only a secondary importance. Such controversies as the one that has raised in Europe over the historicity of Christ would seem to be which seemed to a spiritually minded Indian largely a waste of time. He would concede to it a considerable historical but hardly any religious importance. For what does it matter in the end whether a Jesus, son of the carpenter Joseph, was actually born in Nazareth or Bethlehem, lived and taught and was done to death on a real or trumped up charge of sedition, so long as we can know by spiritual experience the inner Christ, live uplifted in the light of his teaching, and escape from the yoke of the natural law by that atonement of man with God, of which the crucifixion is a symbol. He says there is no importance at all. You have to get the inner meaning of Christ and experience him inwardly. So,
and he ends the sentence with a question mark.
Yeah. Because he's saying, does it matter at all? No? That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, for what does it matter?
Yes.
The sentence begins with that. So that's why a question mark. Actually, it's not a question at all, it's a statement, but it's a suggestion. So, grammatically, you have to put a question mark.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
it's not really a question. So, if the Christ, God made man, there you are. This is the definition of an avatar. God made man, descended into man, lives within our spiritual being, it would seem to matter little whether or not a son of Mary physically lived and suffered and died in Judea. So too, the Krishna who matters to us is the eternal incarnation of the divine and not the historical teacher and leader of men. The eternal incarnation is there in every human body. He is there, Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Hriddesha Tishtati. He is there always in everybody. And that presence, divine presence, may not be that of the psychic being, because the psychic being is individualized. But the divine presence may not be individualized. It may just be present in every human being.
We would term it the soul.
Yes, what you call the soul.
Yes.
That's right. So, this is what he's saying, that the controversy about Avatar, whether Christ lived or not, is not important at all. In fact, in Europe, everything, in Life Divine also he says that every statement you make in the physical world or in the subtle world or even the spiritual world, it can be challenged. Mentally, you can always challenge it. There are people in Europe who challenge even the Holocaust, the Nazi phenomenon.
Yes.
They
true.
say no such thing existed.
Yeah.
But that's not true at all. There are photographs. Okay, so Sri Aurobindo is saying the spiritual avatarhood matters, not the physical avatar. So we go to the next sentence.
So what matters is not the historical teacher and leader of men, but the avatar.
In fact, in the Thoughts and Aphorisms, he has a very interesting sentence. He says that 4 great events, have always been questioned. One was the historicity of Christ, the other was the conquest of Troy, and the other was whether Sri Krishna is living or not, and the battle in Kurukshetra. And he says all these things, the colloquy at Kurukshetra will still decide the future of humanity. So what importance does it have whether Kurukshetra was a historical event or not? He says that in the Thoughts and Aphorisms. He is repeating the same thing here in different words. By the way, he has mentioned something interesting. The crucifixion, the symbol of Christ. Okay? The vertical line indicates the descent of the divine into the physical world. And the cross,
the horizontal.
Okay, the crucifixion is the obstruction that matter gives to the obstructs the divine descent. The descent of the divine, it obstructs. The lower hemisphere and the higher hemisphere are at loggerheads until you manage to get rid of and go to the higher level of consciousness. Both are always there. The divine wants to be himself in light, but he also wants to experience himself in darkness. So both are there. So the symbol he is giving is a very interesting one. The cross is the obstruction to the divine descent.
The horizontal.
Yeah. And in Sri Aurobindo symbol, it's very interesting. The ascending triangle is the aspiration of man going upwards, the ascent. And the descending triangle represents the descent of the divine into the physical world. And the yogi is concentrating only on the ascent. And Sri Aurobindo is concentrating only on the descent. So, the perfect creation would be a combination of both, which is the Sri Aurobindo's square. With the avatar in the lotus, in the center, with the water as a symbol of the multiplicity.
Symbol of? Multiplicity.
Yeah, the water represents the multiplicity, and the avatar is a man-made divine.
The pink lotus representing the avatar.
Yes.
Beautiful.
In seeking the kernel of the thought of the Gita, we need therefore only concern ourselves with the spiritual significance of the human divine Krishna of the Mahabharata, who is presented to us as the teacher of Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. The historical Krishna no doubt existed. He is not discussing Christ, but he is discussing Krishna, because he had the experience of Krishna, we exchanged with him in jail. Sri Krishna himself comes and guides him in the jail regarding the Gita, how to understand the Gita, as well as how to understand the Vedas. So he can't have any doubt about that. And he is also giving examples of the historicity. The historical Krishna no doubt existed. We meet the name first in the Chandogya Upanishad, where all we can gather about him is that he was well known in spiritual tradition as a knower of the Brahman. So well known indeed in his personality and the circumstances of his life that it was sufficient to refer to him by the name of his mother as Krishna, son of Devaki, for all to understand who was meant. In the same Upanishad, we find mention of King Dhritarashtra, son of Vichitravirya. And since tradition associated the two together so closely that they are both of them leading personages in the action of the Mahabharata, we may fairly conclude that they were actually contemporaries, and that the epic is to a great extent dealing with historical characters, and in the war of Kurukshetra with a historical occurrence imprinted firmly on the memory of the race. So he is very clear about it. In fact, Kurukshetra exists even today in the Punjab, in the North India. There is a place called Kurukshetra. It is still there. And Srila is saying the Mahabharata is not only an epic, nor is it only a symbolic story, but it's based on historical facts. That's what he's saying. We know too that Krishna and Arjuna were the object of religious worship in the pre-Christian centuries. And there is some reason to suppose that they were so in connection with a religious and philosophical tradition from which the Gita may have gathered many of its elements and even the foundation of its synthesis of knowledge, devotion and works. And perhaps also that the human Krishna was a founder, restorer, or at the least one of the early teachers of this school. The Gita may well, in spite of its later form, represent the outcome in Indian thought of the teaching of Krishna and the connection of that teaching with the historical Krishna, with Arjuna and with the war of Kurukshetra, may be something more than a dramatic fiction. There you are. In the Mahabharata, Krishna is represented both as the historical character and the avatar. His worship and avatarhood must therefore have been well established by the time, apparently from the 5th to the 1st century BC. So wide a margin, we can't say exactly when. Okay. When the old story and poem or epic tradition of the Bharatas took its present form. There is a hint also in the poem of the story or legend of the avatar's early life in Vrindavan, which, as developed by the Puranas into an intense and powerful spiritual symbol, has exercised so profound an influence on the religious mind of India. We have also in the Harivamsha an account of the life of Krishna, very evidently full of legends, which perhaps form the basis of the Puranic accounts. So, he is referring to the Bhagavatam. It's 4 volumes, the life of Krishna in detail. And Sharma is admitting that there could have been a lot of legends in them. Because these stories weave around these personages to show certain basic truths. So there could be legends. Okay? So Sharma is saying definitely there were legends. And the Harivamsha. The Harivamsha is a Purana. There are many Puranas. There is the Vishnu Purana, there is the Brahma Purana. It's a work of 16,374 verses describing the lineage of Hari and Vishnu, full of symbolic stories and legends. It's a supplement to the Mahabharata, the Harivamsha. Okay? It describes the solar and lunar dynasties up to birth of Krishna. It also describes the Kali Yuga. So, the solar and lunar races, there's a reference to that in the Harivamsha. This is fairly clear what he's saying. Krishna did exist as a historical figure, and he is mentioned in the Mahabharata as an avatar and a historical figure both. So we are concerned with the avatarhood only, not the historical figure so much.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Because I'm not versed in this. The Gita may well, in spite of its later form. Could you speak about that?
In spite of its latest form is the one in which has presently come down to us. The Gita may well, in spite of its later form, represent the outcome in Indian thought of the teaching of Krishna and the connection of that teaching with the historical Krishna. He's saying that there was a tradition where Krishna was teaching spiritual knowledge to those people. So that may have been the origin of the Gita, he's saying. That's what he's saying. He said that earlier. No? He's saying
they were object of religious worship in the pre-Christian centuries.
Yeah. We know too that Krishna and Arjuna were the object of religious worship in the pre-Christian centuries. And there is some reason to suppose that they were so in connection with a religious and philosophical tradition. This is the one he is referring to. From which the Gita may have gathered many of its elements and even the foundation of its synthesis of knowledge, devotion and works. So the Gita in its present form, the later form is exactly this, what we have got today. It may have originated from the teaching of from the traditional teaching of Sri Krishna, historical Krishna. That's what he's saying. The rest is quite clear. The whole para is just telling you that there's enough evidence that Krishna was a historical figure. So, now there are two paragraphs in which he first discusses the Divine Krishna, and the next one he discusses the human Krishna. So this paragraph that we are going to read now describes the Divine Krishna. But all this, though of considerable historical importance, has none whatever for our present purpose. We are concerned only with the figure of the divine teacher as it is presented to us in the Gita, and with the power for which it there stands in the spiritual elimination of the human being. The Gita accepts the human avatarhood, for the Lord speaks of the repeated, the constant manifestation of the divine in humanity when He, the eternal unborn, assumes by His Maya, by the power of the infinite consciousness, to clothe itself apparently in finite forms, the conditions of becoming which we call birth. But it is not this upon which stress is laid, but on the transcendent, the cosmic and the internal divine. It is on the source of all things and the master of all, and on the Godhead secret in man. It is this internal divinity who is meant when the Gita speaks of the doer of violent asuric austerities, troubling the God within, or of the sin of those who despise the divine lodged in the human body, or of the same Godhead destroying our ignorance by the blazing lamp of knowledge. It is then the eternal avatar, this God in man, this divine consciousness always present in the human being, who, manifested in a visible form, speaks to the human soul in the Gita, illumines the meaning of life and the secret of divine action, and gives it the light of divine knowledge, and guidance, and the assuring and fortifying word of the Master of existence in the hour when it comes face to face with the painful mystery of the world. This is what the Indian religious consciousness seeks to make near to itself in whatever form, whether in the symbolic human image it enshrines in its temples, or in the worship of its avatars, or in the devotion to the human guru, through whom the voice of the one world teacher makes itself heard. Through these, it strives to awaken to that inner voice, unveil that form of the formless, and stand face to face with that manifest divine power, love, and knowledge. The whole paragraph is insisting that Sri Krishna may have been a historical figure, but that's not what the Gita is dealing with. The Gita is dealing with the Divine Krishna, the one who is the spiritual, eternal avatar. And the divine is there in every human being. That's what he's insisting. That is what you are trying to understand, and Indian culture is stressing on that. Whether it be in the form of giving respect to the guru, okay, or putting even images in the temples. It is the divine represented in these forms that is being spoken of in the Indian culture. So that's what he's saying. The divine is there in everybody here. That's the eternal avatar. But not everyone can become that avatar. Because this is an Indian conception which is stemming from the Advaita philosophy. The Advaita philosophy says there is only one divine. Whereas it is not there in Christianity or in Islam. It is not there. There are two. The lower is different from the higher. The heaven is different from the earth. But in the Indian tradition and the Advaita philosophy particular, essentially both are divine. So the divine is here also hiding behind the forms. So he is there already. So he is the avatar. That's the avatar that is being spoken of in the Gita. And he has given 2-3 examples of verses. Okay. So we can refer to the verses also. I'll tell you what the verses are. He's saying that clearly shows that the Gita is speaking of the inner divine, not the outer personality who is the avatar. Okay. So, but all this, though of considerable historical importance, interesting by the way, he has dealt with Sri Krishna's historicity, but he has not dealt with Christ's historicity. In the case of Sri Krishna, there is enough evidence.
Yeah.
But in the case of Christ, I don't know if enough evidence is there. I don't know.
Well, we only have the words of his
That's
disciples.
right, yeah.
Yes.
But I don't think you can doubt his historicity.
True.
It made such a huge difference.
Yes.
Half the world is Christian. So how can you say he didn't exist? But all this, though of considerable historical importance, has none whatever for our present purpose. We are concerned only with the figure of the divine teacher as it is presented to us in the Gita, and with the power for which it there stands in the spiritual illumination of the human being. That's what we are concerned with. We are concerned with the inner divine, not the human form. The Gita accepts the divine as the human avatarhood. For the Lord speaks of the repeated, the constant manifestation of the divine in humanity. And there is a footnote. Okay? And the footnote says, he is referring to this one, Bahuni me vyatitani janmani sambhavami yuge yuge. I am born again and again in the world. That's what he is referring to. The constant manifestation of the divine in humanity. In fact, Sri Aurobindo says that whenever there is a change of level from one level to another level, it's always the avatar who does the work. So Ram was an avatar because he established the moral principle. Shri Krishna was the avatar because he established the spiritual principle. And by definition, Sri Aurobindo is the avatar because he is establishing the supramental principle. So obviously by his own definition, he is an avatar. Constant manifestation of divine in humanity. When the infinite consciousness, he, the eternal unborn, that's a divine soul, assumes by his Maya, by the power of the infinite consciousness, to clothe itself apparently in finite forms, the conditions of becoming, which we call birth. So, the avatar is one who is the divine himself who descends into a body built in the human way, built in the biological way. It comes down into. So, in other words, every human being is a future avatar. If he realizes himself, he can be a future avatar. But it is not this upon which stress is laid, but on the transcendent, the cosmic, and the internal divine. So, the divine who is not in the physical world, but the divine essentially who can be transcendent, that means outside the universe, and in the cosmos, and in the individual. The divine manifests himself in 3 ways: transcendentally outside the universe. In the cosmos you can see him also, where many people have experienced that. The universe is the divine, and you have the pantheism philosophy of that. Okay, and there is the internal divine. You see the divine within yourself. So that's the 3. That is the divine that is being spoken of in the Gita. It is on the source of all things and the master of all, and on the Godhead secret in man. There you are. So the Godhead is there in every human being. That's the eternal avatar. But the avatar is when you become conscious of your divinity. Okay, so it is this internal divinity who is meant when the Gita speaks of the doer of violent asuric austerities troubling the Godhead within. So this is chapter 17, verse 5 and 6. Okay? And or of the sin of those who despise the divine lodged in the human body. Okay? Or of the same Godhead destroying our ignorance by the blazing lamp of knowledge. This is chapter 10 and 11, which is there also. The verses in chapter 10 and 11, these examples are there. Destroying our ignorance by the blazing lamp of knowledge. It is then the eternal avatar, this God in man. There you are. So, the eternal avatar is God in man. So, he is always there. The divine consciousness, always present in the human being, who, manifested in a visible form, speaks to the human soul in the Gita. The human soul is Arjuna, and he is speaking to him in the Gita. Illumines the meaning of life and the secret of divine action, and gives it the light of divine knowledge and guidance, and the assuring and fortifying word of the Master of Existence in the hour when it comes face to face with the painful mystery of the world. This fortifying word is the famous thing where he says, Aham tva sarva papebhyo moksha ishyami. I will deliver you from all sin. Man mana bhava, mad bhakta, mad yaji. So, become my minded. Okay? Worship me. Okay? He says. Then I will deliver you from all sin. That's what he is referring to, the fortifying word.
We have this phrase, Master of Existence.
Yes.
Beautiful line in Savitri.
Yes.
The Master of Existence lurks in us.
Yes. That's what he means by secret in the human soul. That's what he's meaning. The Master of Existence. And the Master of Existence is at the supramental level. It is that Master. But otherwise, in the spiritual planes of consciousness, he is there in the cosmos. But he is not Master. The fortifying word of the Master of Existence in the hour when it comes face to face. In fact, it goes, he says, Sarva dharman parijyajya mamekam sharanam vraja. Give up all standards of conduct and all rules and regulations and all dharmas. Depend on me alone. And I will deliver you from all sin. Okay, so that's the fortifying word. So is just putting that as a fortifying word. This is what the Indian religious consciousness seeks to make clear, make near to itself in whatever form. So, whether in the symbolic human image it enshrines in its temples, or in the worship of its avatars, or in the devotion to the human guru, through whom the voice of the one world teacher makes itself heard. So this is something very peculiar in India. One who is superior to you, you always give him respect. It goes so far to a ridiculous extent of even worshipping and giving undue respect to politicians. It has gone to that because it's a fundamental character in the Indian character. It's a fundamental element. Respect to the guru, and you take it to the extreme limit of even bowing down to politicians. Okay? But that's it gets translated that way in the physical world. But that's what he's referring to. In whatever form, whether in the symbolic human image it enshrines in its temples, or in the worship of its avatars, or in the devotion to the human guru, through whom the voice of the one world teacher makes itself heard. Through these, it strives to awaken to that inner voice, unveil that form of the formless, and stand face to face with that manifest divine power, love, and knowledge. So, this last bit is telling you in a guarded way about the truth of the icons, the symbolic images in the forms that you give to the divine. There is a truth behind the making of divine forms in the physical world. Whether it be a photograph or whether it be a sculpture or whether it be a painting, there is a truth which is denied by Islam. They said the divine is formless, he is only transcendent. But that's not true. Even in India we have a cult which says that only the divine is formless. We have the Arya Samaj. The Arya Samaj insists that the divine is formless.
In the Orthodox Christian traditions, no three-dimensional image may be made. Only icons.
I see.
Because they say no three-dimensional image can represent the divine.
That's right. There's a truth in that.
There's a truth in that.
Yeah, of course.
But there's also a truth in India, in the temples.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that beautiful sonnet is there, Srimdos, the stone goddess.
Stone goddess, yes.
In fact, these pictures are all living. If you see, it's very interesting. If you see a photograph of Srimdo and you stand here, you feel he's looking at you. You go 5 meters away, he's still looking at you.
Absolutely. I've had that experience so many times.
Yes.
You can go so far around and he will be still looking at you.
That's right.
I've rarely seen that in any other photograph.
Very interesting.
Yes.
So what we read just now was the Divine Krishna, not the embodied Krishna, but the Divine Krishna. Now he is going to speak about the human Krishna. Okay, so he says, secondly, there is the typical, almost the symbolic significance of the human Krishna who stands behind the great action of the Mahabharata, not as its hero, but as its secret center and hidden guide. That action is the action of a whole world of men, of nations, some of whom have come as helpers of an effort and result by which they do not personally profit. And to these he is a leader. Some as its opponents, and to them he is also an opponent, the baffler of their designs and their slayer, and he seems even to some of them an instigator of all evil and destroyer of their old order and familiar word and secure conventions of virtue and good. Some are representatives of that which has to be fulfilled, and to them he is counselor, helper, friend. Where the action pursues its natural course, or the doers of the work have to suffer at the hands of its enemies and undergo the ordeals which prepare them for mastery, the avatar is unseen or appears only for occasional comfort and aid, but at every crisis his hand is felt, yet in such a way that all imagine themselves to be the protagonists. And even Arjuna, his nearest friend and chief instrument, does not perceive that he is an instrument and has to confess at last that all the while he did not really know his divine friend. He has received counsel from his wisdom, help from his power, has loved and been loved, has even adored without understanding his divine nature. But he has been guided, like all others, through his own egoism, and a counsel, help and direction have been given in the language and received by the thoughts of the ignorance. Until the moment when all has been pushed to the terrible issue of the struggle on the field of Kurukshetra, and the avatar stands at last, still not as fighter, but as the charioteer in the battle car which carries the destiny of the fight, he has not revealed himself even to those whom he has chosen. So this is the paragraph where he is describing the human Krishna, the historical Krishna in the Mahabharata. And he is giving you his relations with so many others, with the Pandavas, with the Kauravas, with all the others. And he is referring specifically to incidents in the Mahabharata. We'll try and refer to it next time, okay, and see what he's talking about. I think we stop here today.
Okay. Namaste all. and thank you for attending.